Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the most comprehensive Hindu analysis on YouTube. So first, let's look at the topics that we are going to discuss today. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 11 important articles. So let's cover them comprehensively so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. But before we start, I have a couple of important announcements, especially if you're preparing for 2027 and beyond. For those students, we are conducting free Unacademy Platinum sessions. Under this program, Sham sir will be conducting these master NCRT classes focusing on macroeconomics from the class 12 NCRT book from 5th May to 9th May. All these sessions are absolutely free. The sessions take place live at 5 p.m. So those interested, please check out the details by clicking on the link provided in the description box below. Now, what is different about Platinum is that it provides for a much better immersive and interactive experience for a student. Because in Platinum classes, the cameras of the students will also have to be turned on mandatorily so that the educator can hold the students accountable and provide for a seamless doubt resolution experience. So if you want to check out this unique experience of the Platinum program, please attend these classes and you will also get to finish class 12 economy book on macroeconomics. And if you're looking to enroll for our Plus and Iconic program, if you want access to our live and recorded lectures from the top educators in the country, you have a great opportunity as Unacademy is providing a flat 50% off along with up to 6 months of free extension. This subscription is available at just 19,999, which is roughly 889 rupees per month. So, those interested, please check out the details by clicking on the link in the description box below. But please remember, you have to enter the code IAS English in order to avail the discount. So, with this, let's get started and look at the first topic. On page number 10, there's a very detailed and insightful article on India's energy security demands and how geopolitical shocks are disrupting them. So, the topic can be very important for international relations under paper 2 and as well as for economy and under GS paper 3. So, let's understand what unique insights can this article provide. See, because this is a topic we have already covered multiple times. But there are some interesting insights in this article which I feel can be relevant for writing your mains answers. Now, when you look at the impact of the Iran war and the disruption it has caused to global oil supplies and gas supplies, it is easily much higher. The overall impact is much higher than the cumulative impact of all the previous oil shocks. See, in the past, we had seen a major oil shock in 1973 when the United States supported Israel during the Yom Kippur War, and the Arab nations, primarily of the OPEC, they essentially imposed an embargo on supplies by cutting down production. Then we saw the second big oil crisis in 1979 following the Iranian Revolution, as Iran was overtaken by a Shia theocracy and ties with Western countries, primarily with the US, was cut. This led to a major disruption in oil supplies from Iran. Then came the Gulf War of 1990, when Saddam Hussein of Iraq invaded Kuwait and dragged the US into the war in the region, triggering the next big oil shock. And in 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, since Russia is a key supplier of fossil fuels and Ukraine is a key supplier of various essential commodities, we saw a big disruption in global supplies, including the supply of oil and gas, especially when Western countries targeted Russia with sanctions to cripple the Russian economy. This had a cascading effect on oil supplies and gas supplies. So now, if you take the cumulative effect of all these four previous incidents and compare that with the disruption shock caused by the Iran war, according to the International Energy Agency, the current crisis is having a much higher impact even as compared to the cumulative effect of all the last four oil shocks. So I think that will put things in perspective to understand the kind of disruption that has taken place. Because nearly 20% of global oil supplies, crude oil supplies, and nearly 25 to 30% of global gas supplies passes through the Hormuz Strait, something which Iran has weaponized in the ongoing conflict. Now, this disruption has directly impacted the Indian economy. We are already feeling the heat almost immediately. Within few days and few weeks, the Indian economy started feeling the heat of the supply chain disruption. So, according to estimates, India's GDP growth is expected to take a significant hit because of the Iran war. See, previous fiscal we grew at around 7.4%. Estimates placed India's growth this year as well roughly above 7%. But now the growth numbers have been revised to just around 6.4, 6.5, and some conservative estimates are even indicating that we will grow only at 6.2%. So more than 1% GDP growth has been erased, wiped off. If you look at inflation numbers as well, prior to the war, India's inflation was in the comfortable range of around 2.3%. But now it is expected to cross the 4% threshold of the RBI, and it can increase up to 4.4% and even slightly above that. So this has a macroeconomic effect, a cascading effect on your forex reserves, the value of the Indian rupee. It could trigger outflow of foreign capital. And essentially, this is a cyclical reaction that takes place. So India is already feeling the entire heat of this conflict. So the article here is basically helping us understand what lessons can we draw from these oil shocks? How can we move away from this dependency? Because even now, India has a dependency of more than 85% when it comes to crude oil imports. In fact, in this year, we were importing nearly 89% of the crude oil that was required by the country as of 2026. But in general, we import close to 85% and above of our crude oil requirement. Now, India has managed to tide over the crisis pretty well, at least to some extent. See, as of now, we have adopted a tactical shift by trying to diversify the oil sources, by trying to increase the options. This has been our short term approach. And this is what India has been doing for many, many decades. Whenever there is a disruption to oil and energy supplies, we seek out new sources, alternate suppliers, and new destinations, new geographies. So, according to the article, this will only provide you a short term solution. Right now, India has started lifting oil, gas from United States as well as our option to reduce our dependency on West Asian oil and gas. We are prioritizing Africa and Latin America region in order to shift our focus away from the West Asia region. But these are only short term solutions. These are tactical moves that will help you keep buying oil, but it will not fundamentally solve your energy dependency problem. So that's why we need to look at the European experience in the Ukraine war. Now, before the Ukraine war began, nearly 45% of Europe's gas requirement was met through Russian supplies. Russia was supplying nearly 45% and above of the gas demand for Europe, primarily through land based pipelines and the Nord Stream undersea pipeline. But this has exposed the vulnerability of such pipeline networks, which in itself becomes like a choke point. If such pipelines are passing through conflict zones, the critical infrastructure can be disrupted, can be targeted. And European countries which perceive an existential threat from Russia following the invasion of Ukraine have deliberately moved away from Russian dependency. Today, they have brought down the dependency on Russia to just around 12% of their gas requirement. Before the war, it was around 45%. So they have basically shifted towards not just new sources and new suppliers, but they have also tried moving away from gas dependency itself. They are trying to find new sources of energy. Primarily, gas is used in Europe for heating solutions during winter months, for household heating, industrial heating, etc. So, Europe, which has been making a bigger transition towards clean, renewable energy, is trying to rely on new forms of energy instead of just focusing on short term, short gap solutions. It has also focused more on different forms of gas from LNG to LPG, which can be produced domestically and thus cut the dependency on Russia. So that's where India has some key lessons. We need to look at global energy trends and we need to anticipate some of the shocks. And instead of just diversifying and finding new suppliers each time, we need to try and alter our energy basket itself. Now, when you look at the growth trajectory and the energy demand, which is coming from the biggest countries today, India, China are right at the top. India happens to be the world's third largest consumer. Now, when you look at the growth trajectory of India, China, and how the demand for energy is growing, you will see that China has hit a plateau stage. China's rising energy demand has hit a plateau, which corresponds to its slightly stagnating economy, and it is already on the decline. But when you compare that with India, for India, the energy demand continues to rise, and in the coming years, most experts anticipate that India's energy demand will continue to increase quite exponentially. So, this leads us to the same question again. How long will you keep buying oil, gas from different countries and different suppliers? Every time there is a supply chain disruption or a geopolitical shock, you try to keep shifting the sources. And these are only short term solutions. It only gives you some tactical relief, nothing more than that. So you need more long term stability for energy supplies. And that is where India will have to prioritize clean renewable energy, solar and wind, along with long term contracts for fossil fuel based sources of energy. So, to prioritize solar and wind, India will really have to step up its battery infrastructure. In fact, in today's paper, we have many related articles which we are going to discuss in a short while that focuses on India's clean energy investments and focuses on the battery infrastructure in the country. You need adequate storage solutions so that at least a large part of your transportation and household consumption of electricity, industrial consumption of electricity can depend on solar and wind energy instead of depending on fossil fuels. And with regard to fossil fuels, you need to always keep as many options as possible with long term reliable contracts. So, this can be seen as a better viable alternative instead of simply jumping the ship towards new suppliers each time. Along with that strategy, you also need further investments in battery storage solutions. Because, see, India has been focusing heavily on solar and wind projects. And we have been studying through our sessions how our solar and wind installed energy capacity has gone up significantly. We have even met our NDC, our nationally determined contribution target under Paris Agreement of having 50% and above installed capacity from non-fossil fuel sources. We've already met that target, but the problem is in utilization of these projects. To what extent the energy being produced is actually being utilized? Because there's a world of difference between installed capacity and actual power generation. In case of intermittent sources like solar and wind, you need battery solutions. You need batteries to store the excess electricity produced during the peak hours so you can use it during the downtime. So, that is a key lesson that India should incorporate into its energy plans. But, however, when you focus heavily on solar, wind, and battery based storage solutions, this will create a new form of dependency on critical minerals. Because without lithium, without nickel, cobalt, even copper, and few rare earth elements, it's very hard to become self reliant when it comes to battery technology and clean renewable forms of energy. This is where we might end up creating a new form of dependency on China, which controls nearly 91% of the supply chains. So, here India will have to plan ahead. We need to draw lessons from our oil and gas dependency, ensure the same mistakes are not repeated when it comes to sourcing critical and strategic minerals. So, India has sufficient plans in place. India has a dedicated critical mineral mission. We have a dedicated public sector unit called Kabil, which is scouting for critical minerals abroad, securing mining licenses from Argentina to Democratic Republic of Congo to Zambia. And India is focusing on domestic exploration as well and recycling. So these initiatives, policy initiatives, could potentially help India ensure that we have reliable supply of critical minerals where we are not exposed to a dependency on other partners. Now, please take up a mains practice question based on what we have discussed. And we will have many more related topics today because there are at least another three articles related to the same topic with regard to battery solutions, with regard to renewable energy capacity of the world. There are many related editorials and columns today. So we will continue discussing the same topic. Now, look at this editorial on page number 8. It focuses on inadequate battery storage solution in India. In fact, this discussion can even help you in your prelims exam. See, on 25th of April, India hit a new landmark, a new milestone. On 25th April, precisely in the afternoon hours, around 2 p.m. to 3 p.m., India registered its highest ever electricity demand in the history of the country. I'll repeat my point. On 25th April in the afternoon, during the peak summer, we registered the highest ever electricity demand, which was around 256.1 gigawatts. And what was interesting was that nearly 21.6% of it was met through solar. That again shows the huge progress India has made when it comes to renewable energy. Even wind energy accounted for a significant share, handling this peak load which was coming in. Because as the temperatures rise during deadly heat waves, the demand for cooling solutions will go up. Demand for fans, air conditioners, coolers, and refrigerators. So we saw the peak demand on 25th April afternoon around 256 gigawatts, out of which nearly 21.5%, 6% came from solar energy alone. But however, this is a very narrow perspective that you're looking at. When you look at that specific instant, that specific minute where the demand surged to 256 gigawatts, then this data holds good. At that moment, solar energy was alone producing almost 21.6% of that electricity. But the real picture will emerge when you look at the 24-hour data. If you take that entire 24-hour cycle of 25th April, what extent of it was coming from solar power, then you will get a much clear picture. So if you take the whole day's data, solar contribution drops to just 10.8%. And that too after the evening hours, after sunset, it dropped to 0.1%. So what does this tell you? In the afternoon, when the peak sun is out there, solar energy is essentially doing the heavy lifting along with from other sources of power, including thermal power. But once you take the 24-hour data, once you take the night time into account when the sun is not there, that's where you will see the reality. That shows that vast difference between actual installed capacity and how much electricity is actually being produced. And even if it is produced, is it being distributed and utilized? These are completely different questions altogether. Just because you have great installed capacity doesn't mean you're producing the same amount of electricity. Just because you're producing that amount of electricity doesn't mean all of it is being utilized. So there is a huge mismatch here. And this is entirely because we lack battery solutions. Believe it or not, many states and many private power producers who are leading solar power generators, they're asked by the Ministry of Power and the Central Electricity Authority to stop producing solar power. Almost on a daily basis, especially during summer months, they get orders from the Central Electricity Authority and the Ministry of Power to stop solar power production. You know why? because the power grids cannot handle the voltage fluctuation that keeps happening with solar power. Because during peak sunlight, there is maximum power output coming. And once evening sets in, once the dark sets in, there is a sudden drop that happens, which means much of the solar power being generated is not being stored. It's not being supplied in a stable manner. Now, when you look at today's smart power grids, you need stable voltage to be maintained. You need stable supply to be present. But in case of solar and wind, this is not possible. These are intermittent sources of power. So many times, the largest solar plants in the country, owned by state government entities or private players, they are ordered by the government to stop producing electricity. Why? Because there is no place to store it. And during night, it takes a complete hit. So this is a complete wastage of the public exchequer, because power producers will have to be compensated for the losses they'll incur. And it's an inefficient way of utilizing your installed solar power capacity. So if you want to achieve true energy independence and move towards clean, renewable forms of energy, right, you need to ensure battery infrastructure picks up, battery solutions are provided along with scaling solar and wind energy projects. See, over the last 10, 15 years, though we have prioritized solar and wind projects, the obsession has been with just setting up the power plants. It's about laying the solar panels, setting up the wind turbines. But there hasn't been adequate focus on establishing battery infrastructure that is needed to store that energy. When the peak production happens, that energy should be stored and should be used during the low time. So let's say during afternoons, during summer months, that's when you see peak solar energy production. And storing this will ensure that even during nighttime after sunset, that energy can be utilized. The same logic holds good for wind energy as well, right? Where you generate the maximum wind energy and store it and utilize even when the wind is not contributing so much. So when you look at this combination, it's like basically a unbuilt bridge, a bridge to nowhere. If you've been to Bangalore, there's this place called Ejipura near Kormangla, where this unbuilt bridge flyover is standing from many, many years, right? It's become a joke on the internet. So just focusing on solar and wind energy projects is like this. If you don't invest in battery technology, if you don't complete the bridge, what's the point? Right? It's like building half the bridge and leaving it. So if you just build solar and wind projects without prioritizing batteries, right, then you're basically building half the bridge and you're leaving it, which serves no purpose, no utility at all. See, today battery costs have gone down. The only concern is about sourcing the minerals. So as India has ambitious plans to secure access to critical minerals, setting up co-located battery storage infrastructure is essential. Wherever the power plants are located, you need to co-locate battery infrastructure at the same location. So this should become the norm when future projects are awarded and licensed for setting up solar panels and wind turbines. At the same location, at the source where energy is being produced, you need to have mandatory battery infrastructure to store the energy. This was not mandated previously. So ensuring that battery infrastructure is co-located with energy projects is going to be critical to complete that bridge. Or else it will be like a half-built bridge, a half-completed bridge, which serves absolutely no utility. So based on this concept, please take up this question relevant for economy and even for environment and ecology under GS paper 3. Solar capacity without storage is a half-built bridge. Critically analyze. So you need to argue as to why battery storage is critical for ensuring full utilization of solar and even wind capacity. Now let's move to the next article. On page 8, there's an editorial focusing on Project 17A of the Indian Navy. Recently, if you remember, we had discussed about the same topic under the prelim section. Now, let's go a little deep into this topic and understand some of the concerns being flagged by the editorial. Under Project 17A, Indian Navy has designed and indigenously built the Nilgiri class of stealth frigates. These are essentially used in multi-mission attacks. It is used in anti-surface warfare. It is used for anti-submarine warfare. It can be used for air defense. So these attack frigates, they are loaded with modern arsenal, advanced sensory and radar equipment, and they are primarily a key part, a key component of your naval fleet, particularly if you're building a carrier based battle group led by aircraft carriers. Frigates play a critical role because they are slightly smaller in size compared to your large destroyers, which means they are more maneuverable, right? They can move quickly as well, and they carry the firepower which is required. So, Indian Navy has been building this very ambitious project. It's a 45,000 crore project under which the Nilgiri class of frigates are being indigenously designed, developed, produced, and inducted into the Navy. So, Mazgaon Dock Limited, along with GRSE, Garden Reach Ship Builders, they are the defense entities or public sector units that are involved in this construction of the project. Now, recently, INS Mahendragiri was inducted. That's why the topic is in news. INS Mahendragiri is one of the latest naval frigates to be inducted under Project 17A. Now, previously under Project 17, the Shivalik class of frigates were inducted. Next, the Indian Navy is planning another project, Project 17B, which will also focus on stealth frigates. So, editorial is raising a question that does it really serve any purpose when you keep on building more and more frigates? What purpose does it serve from a security perspective? How does it really enhance India's maritime security? See, today, after looking at the West Asia conflict, looking at the various threats in the Indian Ocean, it's very clear and evident that you need a very powerful, dominant blue water navy to dominate the waters of the Indian Ocean to secure India's trade and security interests. From Hormuz to Bab el Mandeb to East Africa to Malacca Strait, these waters will have to be secured by Indian Navy. So there is a need for an expanded naval fleet. At the same time, we face many other coastal threats from terrorism to smuggling and piracy, and dealing with non traditional threats like Houthis launching drone attacks in the region. So the Indian Navy has its plate full. Plus, you have the Chinese PLA constantly projecting power into the Indian Ocean, posing a threat to Indian interests. So the Indian naval ambitions are designed to counter all these threats. Now, when you look at Project 1717A and the upcoming 17B, the Comptroller Auditor General of India, the CAG, has already flagged many, many serious concerns which are not being addressed by the Defense Ministry, by the Navy, and the other stakeholders involved. According to CAG findings, though the Navy claims that these indigenously built vessels have a very high indigenous content, the reality is that the critical technologies and components, they are all imported. Now, let's say Mazgaon Dock Limited, right? It will basically use the design provided by the Warship Design Bureau, which is housed within the Indian Navy. Indian Navy has an indigenous Warship Design Bureau. But the CAG has noted that the Navy keeps on changing the design plan hundreds of times during the construction phase. That also leads to delays. Repeated changes in the design has often led to prolonged delays, which increases the commissioning period and the induction period. Now, along with that, though it is claimed that these vessels might have 75-80% indigenous content, aligning with Make in India uh, initiative, the reality is that critical components like radars, key sensors, and sometimes even the engines that are critical for propulsion, they're all imported. So without the critical components, the projects will come to a halt. Many times the delivery of these vessels get delayed because the hull is built, the physical structure is built, but it doesn't have the critical components to make it combat ready. Now, what use is a ship without its critical components, without the radars, without the sonar equipment, without the key sensors, without its propulsion systems, right? This is where India still has a lot of dependency on imports of these key technologies. First of all, there are a lot of design changes that keep happening during the production phase, which increases the production time, leading to substantial delays in the project. Plus, the indigenous content, which is claimed to be very high, it is primarily in regular materials and components, but critical components, they're all imported in these vessels as well. So, this raises key questions about the very viability of these projects. So the editorial is asking, does India really need these expensive warships? Because see, these expensive warships like a frigate is primarily needed, as I told you, to deter enemy submarines or to engage in actual combat operations in air defense role, in anti-surface warfare. So if you're saying the goal is to tackle the PLA threat from China, given that Chinese naval deployments have gone up substantially into the Indian Ocean, then these frigates under Project 17A, they may not be the right fit to deter and counter China because all the critical components here are imported. The projects are facing multiple delays because of this. Then, if you say that the purpose of these warships is to prevent another 2611 Mumbai attack, to enhance our coastal security, or to deal with non traditional threats like Houthis and piracy, the point is you don't need such frigates to deal with these threats. That's They are basically incompatible. To deal with these coastal security threats, you basically need smaller, fast fleets, which the Indian Coast Guard already possesses. So does the Indian Navy as well. These large warships don't help you in countering pirates or in dealing with any illegal infiltration attempts or smuggling. These coastal threats can't be dealt with these large warships. They're not meant for that. Now, when you look at the reality of Project 17A, it is neither genuinely helping India to deter the Chinese threat, nor it is useful to deal with other non-traditional threats. So that is where questions are being raised on the viability of these projects. Maybe the projects are still being pursued because you need to utilize the capacity of your defense industries. When large public sector units like Mazgaon Dock Limited, GRSC have been set up, and if they are not given enough contracts, right, you're basically killing your defense ecosystem. Maybe because of an industrial need, the Navy continues to persist with these projects despite the delays. But this is not the right approach, according to the editorial. You can't base your defense plans on the needs of the industry. It should be based on the genuine threats that we are dealing with. Now, when you look at Indian Ocean, there are three specific threats we can identify. One is, of course, the threat posed by the Chinese PLA Navy incursions, particularly deployment of Chinese submarines. Second would be non-traditional threats in the form of piracy, then as well as infiltration of terrorists, as we saw during the 2611 Mumbai attacks, or dealing with smuggling, dealing with extremist groups like Houthis, which can disrupt shipping. And the third kind of challenge we face here is ensuring freedom of navigation for our vessels, ensuring that our vessels can freely move in the sea lanes of communication. Right? We have seen what happens when freedom of navigation is disrupted by countries like Iran or China and others. Blockage of Hormuz, disputes in South China Sea, right? Military aggression of China. It can disrupt the sea lanes of communication and basically prevent you from exercising your freedom of navigation. So you need a strong navy to mainly deter these three threats. Now, these frigates, which are mainly using foreign components, especially for critical um, components, it doesn't really serve either of the purposes, right? You can deal with non-traditional threats with the small, fast fleets that you have with the Navy and the Coast Guard. And the existing fleets are capable of achieving the other objectives. But to deter China, you need to focus on genuine indigenization and capable anti-submarine warfare capabilities, which may be lacking in the frigates of Project 17A, according to the editorial. So here, the article provides us a comparison with the coastal surveillance radar project that India pursued after the 26/11 Mumbai attacks. Since Pakistani terrorists easily infiltrated into Mumbai, it exposed the weakness in our coastal defense. After which, the then Manmohan Singh government launched the ambitious coastal surveillance radar project, and entire coastline of India, from Gujarat to West Bengal, even Lakshadweep and Andaman Nicobar, have been covered with a chain of coastal radars. Now, in phase two, we have extended these radar chains to our friendly countries in Indian Ocean, including Mauritius, Seychelles, and Sri Lanka. So, India has created an entire chain of coastal radars all across the Indian Ocean, and the data is all integrated into IFC IOR, Information Fusion Center for Indian Ocean region, which functions as a national command control center for all the maritime naval intelligence. It's located in Gurugram on the outskirts of Delhi, operated by Indian Navy. In fact, the facility is so critical, many foreign navies have deployed their liaison officers to share and exchange data and information. But however, the entire project is import dependent because critical components used by Bharat Electronics Limited, they are all procured from abroad. That again exposes the gaps, right? It highlights the security vulnerabilities. So the foreign dependency on critical components in defense remains a challenge. That's why the editorial is urging the Navy to strategize better, plan better, and focus more on indigenous models which genuinely serve the threat perception which is there. Just blindly building large warships and spending thousands of crores may not really actually help deal with the threats that are present on the ground. So the editorial is asking the Navy to introspect, to carefully evaluate the threats that are there and accordingly invest in the kind of assets that are needed. Now, moving on, we have this infographic on page number 9 that focuses on the global energy demand, the rise we are seeing in global energy demand, and how, for the first time ever, this rise has been met entirely by renewable energy. Now, this is a significant milestone in the global economy itself. According to the available data, if you take the rise, the year on year increase in global energy demand, there has been an additional demand created for 850 terawatt hours of energy. This is the increase in energy demand on a year to year basis. Compared to the previous year, right? There has been a 850 terawatt hour increase in the energy demand. And this is entirely being taken care of by renewable energy, by solar, wind, and other forms of renewable energy. And the positive aspect is that you see a decline in fossil fuel based electricity production. Overall consumption, the growth in fossil fuel consumption is seeing a slight decline. So, this is a very new trend, a very unanticipated trend. So, when you look at the share of coal, because across the world, the share of coal remains the highest when it comes to power production. It previously used to be around 36%. Now it has dropped to just around 33%. You see a significant reduction in coal consumption for electricity production. Now compare this with solar and wind. Look at the curve rising over here in the last decade. How solar and wind have managed to contribute significantly more, which is accompanied by a parallel decline in the contribution of coal for electricity production. This is the reason why the world was able to achieve this goal, where the rise in energy demand of 850 terawatt hours, that was the additional demand created in the last 1 year. And this additional new demand for electricity has been entirely met by renewable energy. So, this is some positive news to tackle emissions, to deal with global warming, to tackle pollution, as you can reduce your dependency on fossil fuels if the trend continues. Now, when you look at India, in the month of March, the import of crude oil has declined, but this is primarily because of the war and the blockade of Hormuz Strait. But we continue to depend heavily on coal based electricity generation. Even now, if you take actual electricity being produced, almost 60% of electricity is coming from thermal power plants, right? But if you look at installed capacity, we already have almost 52% of electricity coming from renewable sources, right? That is only with regard to installed capacity. But actual power generation, 60% of it nearly is coming still from thermal power. But we are seeing some positive improvements in solar and wind and other forms of clean renewable energy. So these trends are something which can help you in your prelims exam. Some of the overall trends over the last few years, right? The exact specific data and numbers that we can point out. If you can try to make a note of this, could be important for prelims. You can use it directly in your mains answers as well. Now, moving on, there's another article again related to energy and the future of the energy sector. This article here is focused on industrial heat pump. Industrial heat pump. So let's understand what is an industrial heat pump, why the article is promoting the usage of industrial heat pumps. See, when you look at energy consumption, in India, nearly half of the energy, half of the electricity produced is used by industries. If you take India's overall energy and electricity demand, nearly half of it is taken just by the industries alone, consumed by industries alone. And as we studied, much of this energy is coming from fossil fuels. Now, there are many industries where heating is required, where steam has to be generated or some form of heat has to be generated to alter the products. Take, for example, in textile industries, for dyeing, for washing, for dealing with the fabric which is being made. Textile industry requires enormous amount of heat. It requires steam in particular. You take food processing. In food processing, obviously you require heat, right? You need to cook the food products. You also need refrigeration solutions as well, right? So food processing industry has a massive energy demand. Then you have pharmaceuticals, then chemicals, which all require some or the other form of heat, either in the form of hot water or steam or constant heat to be maintained, to heat up the products, to heat up the intermediary products. Then you also have the paper industry, the pulp industry. Like this, the list can go on. There are several industries, many of them in the MSME sector, which rely heavily on industrial heat produced through fossil fuel sources and electricity generated through fossil fuels. So most of the industries operate these massive boilers driven by furnaces, right? They have these large industrial scale boilers where coal is the primary fuel used in the furnace in order to heat the water, produce the steam, and use the steam or the hot water for various industrial activities. Now, what if I told you this process is highly inefficient? This is one of the most inefficient ways of generating heat for industrial purposes. If you look at the coefficient of performance, it is way less than 100% because much of the heat is lost. Now, you take cooking in your home, for example, right? You're not directly heating the food, right? You're heating a vessel. Basically, you're transferring the heat. Much of the heat is being lost in the air. Some of the heat is getting transferred to the vessel or the heating material, and then it transfers to the food product. Imagine this in food processing industries where massive industrial stoves have to be heated. Massive industrial level cookers have to be heated. Almost half of that energy is getting lost, getting wasted. The same applies in metallurgical industries as well. These are hard to abate sectors where you can't easily replace the, the heating source. In industries like steel, iron, aluminum, right? These are hard to abate industries. They are inherently dependent on fossil fuels to generate heat through these industrial boilers. But they are not energy efficient. They contribute to more greenhouse gas emissions. They contribute to air pollution. It creates a big hazard for the workers. They're exposed to very high levels of heat, which is an occupational hazard, a safety hazard as well. If you remember, in many previous classes, we have studied why these industrial boilers are unsafe, how it can result in tragedies and accidents. So, one way to deal with all these problems is through industrial heat pumps. Industrial heat pump is a one stop solution. It can help reduce your dependency on coal and fossil fuels. It can reduce emission of greenhouse gases. It can reduce air pollution. It can create a safer working environment for the workers as well. And at the same time, it will generate much more efficient heat, which is required by various industries. So you need to understand what is this heat pump. This is available at a household level as well. It looks exactly like an air conditioner, but it can provide both heating and cooling solutions. But it functions in a very different manner compared to your regular air conditioner or heating unit. Now imagine this scaled up at industrial level, right? Instead of using a furnace and a boiler, which is very, very inefficient, these industrial heat pumps, they basically use a compressor, a evaporator, and condenser, and it's powered by electricity. And for every ounce of or unit of electricity you're providing, it can generate nearly 3 to 4 times the output. So the coefficient of performance is 3 to 4, meaning it is efficient 300 to 400% compared to your regular heating and cooling solutions, right? So a heat pump takes in the heat available in the air. If you want it inside, right, it'll compress and it'll provide that heat inside. Or if you want cooling to be done, a heat pump will transfer the heat using this system of evaporator, compressor, and condenser, and it'll provide for cooling as well. And this has very, very high efficiency. And imagine if this electricity source is coming from clean energy, from solar. Look at the efficiency which gets built up into the industry. Because when you're using boilers, when you're burning coal, I'll give one example to understand the scale at which this operates. Let's take a garment factory, for example. Okay. In a garment factory, to produce 1 meter of fabric, can someone guess as to how much coal is required? Approximately, you need zero point 0.4 to 0.5 kilograms of coal. So 400 grams to 500 grams of coal has to be burnt to produce just 1 meter of fabric. Imagine how many meters of fabric is produced in Indian industry. We are a leading textile producer. And the amount of coal which is consumed just by textile industry to produce heat for dyeing and washing the fabric, right? Now this is highly inefficient. Plus we are coal import dependent. We heavily depend on importing coal from Indonesia and other countries. That increases our import bill as well. So instead, if we can use industrial heat pumps, which are efficient, which can use electricity from the grid, and if the electricity is also clean, this can solve multiple problems in one shot. See, right now, what happens when you're heating a boiler, these large industrial boilers are designed for maximum capacity. Let's say a factory is expecting to have maximum output on a certain day, right? To meet that requirement, the boiler is designed. Now, do you think every factory produces maximum output on every given day and every given time? No. So they are basically heating the water, producing steam no matter what. So that is the whole logic of industrial heating, that you first spend maximum energy, half of it gets wasted. You heat up the water to boiling level, produce the steam, use that heat. And if the output is low, then they lower, they actually reduce the temperature as well later. There are many industrial processes like in food processing and in pharmaceuticals where they first heat up the water to 100 degrees Celsius. Just imagine the heat which would have gone into it. They generate the steam or the hot water, then they cool it down because they need water and steam at a cooler temperature for a certain process. This is highly inefficient and useless process which is happening in the industry across the world. So industrial heat pumps can solve this because they can provide customized heating to the exact extent that you require with great efficiency. When you're burning coal in these furnaces, you are releasing massive quantities of carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, particulate matter, oxides of nitrogen, right? So all the greenhouse gases, they are contributing to global warming. It is climate inefficient. More importantly, it's contributing to significant air pollution. And increased particulate matter in the air is directly responsible for millions of deaths in the country and as well as across the world. Then look at worker safety as well. Under these extreme heat conditions, that too in peak summers, it's very difficult for workers to be exposed to this. They suffer from various health and physiological stress, which can even lead to heat strokes, or boiler explosions can even kill the workers. So it's a question of occupational safety, it's occupational hazard. Whereas industrial heat pumps in comparison are much, much safer and they provide the right amount of heat that is required. So if the heat pumps can be powered with clean electricity coming from solar, wind, hydropower, etc., it will give you nearly 300 to 400% efficiency, right? It has a COP of 3 to 4, making it 300 to 400% times efficient compared to your regular industrial boilers. So that is why this article is making a strong case for using industrial heat pumps in MSME industries. Next, a quick update on the sanctioned strength of the Supreme Court. See, currently the Supreme Court of India has 34 judges in total. This includes 33 judges plus the CJI, the Chief Justice of India, right? The last time the strength of the Supreme Court was increased was back in 2019, nearly 6-7 years ago, when the Supreme Court Number of Judges Act of 1956 was amended by the Parliament, right? The Constitution of India makes it very clear under Article 124, Clause 1, that Parliament is the sole authority to decide upon the number of judges for the Supreme Court. Right? Article 124, Clause 1 vests this authority to decide upon the number of judges for the Supreme Court in the hands of the Indian Parliament. Accordingly, in 1956, this law was enacted, the Supreme Court Number of Judges Act. It has been amended several times to increase the strength of the judges depending on the workload on the Supreme Court. So the last time the strength was increased was in 2019. Back then, we had 31 judges plus the CJI. The strength was 32. It was raised to 34, 33 plus the CJI. So now the workload has gone up significantly on the Supreme Court post-pandemic. Because during COVID-19 pandemic, e-filing of cases were allowed, which led to a huge surge in cases in front of the Supreme Court. Right now, Supreme Court is dealing with a backlog of nearly 92,000 cases. Very soon, following the next coming break, because the courts take these recess, the backlog will definitely increase to above 1 lakh. It's going to cross the 1 lakh mark. So there is a dire need to increase the strength of the Supreme Court, the benches, right? Because see, in the coming months, many existing judges are going to retire. If you look at the current seniority list, at least 5 to 6 current judges are all set to retire in this year, creating a huge vacancy. We already have 2 vacancies as of now, and further vacancies will get added. That's the reason why the government is pushing for immediate increase in the sanctioned strength of the Supreme Court. The Union Cabinet has approved this proposal to have 38 judges. That is 37 plus the Chief Justice of India. So from the current 34, the sanction strength will increase to 38. But this requires parliamentary approval, meaning the law has to be amended by the parliament. So now that it has been approved by the cabinet, the proposal has been approved, the amendment bill will be pushed into the parliament, and once enacted, the sanction strength will jump to 38, including the Chief Justice of India. Next, the government of India is trying to simplify the FDI approval process and FDI norms to attract more foreign direct investment into the country. As you know, FDI is crucial to create long term capital and help in creating long term assets. So, when it comes to granting approvals for FDI investments in the country, we have the Ministry of Commerce, the nodal ministry, and the Department for Industrial Promotion and Internal Trade, the Department for Promotion of Industry, the Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade, the DPIIT, which mainly scrutinizes these proposals and coordinates with various other ministries and departments of the government to allow FDI investments into the country. Right now, the deadline set for approving FDI investments was at 10 weeks. There's a standard operating protocol under the department. So there is a single window clearance mechanism. Once application is received, right, all the processes, they should happen within 10 weeks. But there are many hurdles, many difficulties in the entire approval process. So that the ministry is trying to clear up, make it much more easier to improve ease of doing business. And it is setting a new deadline, a new SOP. Though the deadline is increasing to 12 weeks, it will provide for much more seamless investment environment into the country. A completely new SOP is being rolled out by the Ministry of Commerce, and a deadline of 12 weeks would be provided to ensure that the approval is granted for bringing FDI into a country. Now, when it comes to a very large investment, if let's say FDI proposed is in the range of billions of dollars, right, then approval is required by the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs for very large investments. For very large FDI investments, approval has to come from Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs. But for regular smaller sized FDI investments, the investor will have to use this online portal which has been set up. There is a single window portal, the National Single Window System. It's essentially a foreign investment facilitation portal which has been created by the Ministry of Commerce, by the DPIIT. So they have to file the application over here, expressing their interest, declaring the purpose and the quantum of investment. Once the proposal is received, according to the new SOP, the department will get 2 days to scrutinize the proposal and forward this to the concerned stakeholders. So it will have to forward the proposal to RBI and other regulators to see if all regulations are being followed. It will have to forward the proposal to Ministry of Home Affairs for an intelligence background check by the IB to see if the investment is hostile in nature, if it can pose any security threat. It will be forwarded to the Ministry of External Affairs as well to keep in mind the foreign policy considerations. It's forwarded to many other concerned ministries depending on which sector the investment is happening or concerned departments and other organs of the government. Now, these entities will get up to 4 additional weeks to provide any comments. But in the first 2 weeks, they have to give their initial comments. They have to carry out initial scrutiny within 2 weeks. And the DPIIT can take another 2 weeks for itself to scrutinize the proposal. So there itself, almost 1 month has gone in the initial scrutiny. Now, all these other stakeholders get another month to provide any additional comments. So totally 2 months. And if they don't provide any additional comments, it is deemed to be approved by the concerned stakeholders. Now, finally, DPIIT will take another 4 weeks to grant the final approval. So in total, 3 months, the proposal will get approved. unless and until serious objections are raised by any of the other ministries or regulators. So this provides for greater clarity for investors. Previously, though the deadline was 10 weeks, it was not being followed. It was largely being breached, creating an uncertain environment for investors. Now, with a refined SOP, a clear deadline of 12 weeks, and most likely within the 3-month period, the approvals can be granted if all the criteria are met. So this will provide for a more seamless experience, a paperless experience as well, because the process is entirely online. And this could improve the investment environment in the country. Now, coming to the prelim section, let's take a quick look at the small articles. The Indian Railways has established the 18th railway zone in the country. A very, very important development, not just for UPSC civil services exam, for other government exams as well. The South Coast Railway Zone has basically been established, and it will all take effect from June onwards. So it will be based out of Vizag, Vishakhapatnam. See, this was a commitment made under the Andhra Pradesh Reorganization Act. When Andhra Pradesh was bifurcated into Telangana and Andhra Pradesh, under the Reorganization Act, this commitment had been made by the center that a South Coast Railway Zone would be created to provide for better railway infrastructure and investments in Andhra Pradesh. So this will cover regions like Guntakal, Guntur, and Vijayawada. These are very critical hubs along with the coastline of Andhra Pradesh. It's actually a strategic region as far as the cargo movement in the country is concerned, especially when you look at freight movement between different ports on the east coast of India. This particular zone along the coastline of Andhra Pradesh is very, very crucial for the Indian economy. Almost 17% of our freight movement is happening in this particular zone. That will tell you the strategic and economic importance of this railway zone. So, on the railway networks present here, nearly 17% of the country's freight is being carried from ports like Kolkata, Paradip, and Vishakhapatnam, Chennai. So, it's a critical link, a critical backbone for India's industrial and logistical framework. So, a dedicated railway zone is now coming up. It will be the 18th railway zone based out of Vishakhapatnam. Next, there's an article related to UDGAM, the undisclosed or unclaimed deposits gateway to access information. UDGAM stands for any unclaimed deposits where the deposit holder might have passed away and the legal heirs, they may not be aware as to where the individual had stored all their money and deposits in which bank, right? This is something which affects many families when a member of the family passes away, right? And they have these undeclared or undisclosed bank accounts which the family members are not aware of. The legal heirs then find it almost very difficult and challenging to claim those deposits. So massive amounts of money is left with banks and cooperative banks, which is taken by the RBI, deposited into a fund. And to make it easier for the legal heirs to identify such unclaimed deposits and to withdraw those deposits, this portal has been created called UDGAM, Unclaimed Deposits Gateway to Access Information. So the legal heir can use this portal, it's an online portal, to check the bank accounts linked to the deceased individual, the deceased family member, and accordingly raise a claim to claim all those deposits which were unclaimed. So RBI in 2014 established the DEF, Depositors Education and Awareness Fund. 90% of the unclaimed deposits are taken by the RBI, deposited into this fund. Now, once the claim is raised on UDGAM portal by the legal heirs, by following the due process, then the banks are supposed to release these funds with RBI approval. Right now, 30 banks are integrated into this network. See, this topic has come up in news because of a related case at the Supreme Court, where a petitioner has challenged the inability to access unclaimed funds. And the Supreme Court has been met with this response. The RBI has informed the Supreme Court that the UDGAM portal is meant for this purpose, to handle unclaimed deposits, to give that gateway to access that information so legal heirs can raise their claims and withdraw the funds of their family members. Next, we have the Malcolm Adiseshiah Award in news. It's a miscellaneous topic. The award is primarily given to social scientists, to developmental economists. So please remember the domain in which this award is given out. It's given out for development economics. It's primarily awarded to social scientists and development economists, named after Malcolm Adiseshiah. Malcolm Adiseshiah was a former Rajya Sabha member, well-known Indian development economist. So kindly read a little more about him, and can you let me know some of his key works in the comment section below? So there's an award instituted in his name, which has been won by Raghav Das Gaya for his work in the field of social sciences and development economics. Now, coming to the last article, the cabinet has given a nod to make any insult to the Vande Mataram, the national song, a criminally punishable offense. The cabinet has approved amendments to the Prevention of Insults to National Honor Act 1971. See, this law covers national symbols like national anthem, the national flag, then as well as the Constitution of India. So any deliberate attempt to disrespect these national symbols or to create offense by showing that disrespect towards these national symbols, it is treated as a punishable offense. It can be met with a 3-year jail term or a fine or both. So under this law, the Prevention of Insults to National Honor Act 1971, up to 3-year jail can be provided as a punishment with a fine or both. So now the government has approved the inclusion of the national song Vande Mataram. As you know, Vande Mataram, written by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, in published in his novel Anand Mat in the 1880s, became a key symbol of resistance during colonial rule. But it also became a subject of intense polarization on communal lines, as some of the stanzas were not acceptable to Muslims and the other communities in the country. Eventually, the Indian National Congress adopted only 2 stanzas, the first 2 stanzas of Vande Mataram, dropping the rest, and it used to be sung at various Congress sessions, um, just the first couple of stanzas. But recently, the BJP government under Prime Minister Modi, they have accused the Congress of trying to appease one community and disrespecting the national song. And the MHA has issued an order to ensure that all the stanzas of Vande Mataram is sung. And what has been more controversial and disturbing is that the MHA has given the order to give precedence to national song over the national anthem of India. Though it's not legally binding, though it doesn't have any legal backing as such, the order is supposed to be voluntary. But now, if this amendment is carried out, if any offense or insult to Vande Mataram will be treated as criminally punishable, then those who may not follow the orders of MHA might be charged and they could potentially face a jail term. The MHA might be trying to make it legally enforceable, right, through an indirect route. And that leads to fresh controversy regarding the usage of Vande Mataram, right? The MHA has ordered that all stanzas have to be sung and Vande Mataram should be given preference over the national anthem. But it was not enforceable as such. It was treated as a uh, voluntary commitment, right? Where MHA was giving this recommendation to the entire country, especially the branches of the government. But now, any insult, if the amendment is carried out, could be treated as an offense, and this could be interpreted potentially as an insult, right? So there is a concern regarding this. It again opens up this political divide between the national song and the national anthem. Now, we end this session with this topic. I hope it was insightful and interesting. If you benefited, do press the like button, share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.